Welcome to John Carter Stories. You know that feeling when you come home after months away and everything is supposed to feel familiar? The smell of the street, the sound of the elevator, the creak of your own front door. You're tired from the flight. Your bags are heavy, but your chest is light because you're finally going back to the one place in the world that is completely, undeniably yours? Yeah, that was supposed to be my day. My name is John. I'm 31 years old. And the day I came back from the most transformative experience of my life, I stepped out of a taxi and watched strangers in hard hats tear my soul apart with their bare hands. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. Because what happened to me, I still can't believe it sometimes. I'll be making coffee in the morning and it'll just hit me all over again, and I have to sit down and breathe and remind myself that it's over now, that I survived it, that I came out the other side. But before I get to how it ends, you need to understand where it all began. For most of my adult life, my address was a third-floor loft in an old factory building on the east side of the city. When I first moved in, the neighborhood smelled like rust and wet concrete. Nobody wanted to live there. The alleyways were dark. The buildings were peeling. And the only people who walked those streets after 10 at night were the ones who had nowhere else to be. I loved it. The loft wasn't glamorous. The windows leaked cold air in winter. The radiator knocked like it had opinions. The elevator broke every 3 months like clockwork. But it was mine. Mine in a way that nothing else in my life ever had been. It had belonged to my grandfather before it belonged to me. My grandfather, Arthur, a painter, a quiet man with enormous hands and a laugh that came from somewhere deep and real. The kind of laugh that made you feel like the room got warmer when it arrived. He raised me after my grandmother passed, when my parents became what I can only describe as a pair of expensive shadows. Always moving, always busy, always slightly out of reach. Arthur taught me how to stretch canvas until it sang when you tapped it. He taught me that a blank wall is not something to fear. It is something to listen to. He taught me that silence, used correctly, is not absence. It is power. And when he died, he left me the loft. Not because it was worth anything then. Not because of money or investment or any of the cold calculations that would come later to haunt me. He left it to me because in a family where everything I owned always felt temporary, always felt borrowed, always felt like it could be taken back at any moment, he wanted me to have something that was truly, permanently mine. For years, I built my life inside those walls. I painted through heartbreak and hope and everything in between. I stretched canvas in the early morning light that came to the east-facing windows, thick and golden and stubborn, the kind of light that doesn't apologize for arriving. My exhibitions weren't enormous. My name wasn't in every magazine, but my work was real and it was growing. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was becoming something. And then the city discovered charm. String lights appeared in the alleyways overnight, it seemed. The warehouses became galleries. The peeling buildings got sandblasted and painted in tasteful shades of gray and cream. Coffee shops arrived with minimalist menus and complicated milk options. The rent became something predatory. And the building my grandfather had left me, that rust-smelling, radiator-knocking, elevator-breaking building, became something valuable. I tried not to think about what that meant. Then I got the opportunity of a lifetime, an art residency in Berlin, 3 months, a proper studio, a community of artists, and most importantly, no one who needed anything from me. My family, to their credit, said all the right things when I left. They smiled at the airport. They said they were proud. They called the first week and asked how I was settling in. By week 2, the calls had mostly stopped. By month 2, I had stopped noticing. Berlin broke something open in me. Something I hadn't realized was sealed. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was anonymous. Nobody asked me to be practical. Nobody called me to borrow my car or my competence or my ability to smooth over tension with a well-placed smile. I painted until my wrists ached and my chest felt wide open, and the work I was making started to scare me in the best possible way. I started a series I've been afraid of for years. Work about inheritance. About being loved conditionally. about rooms that hold memory in their walls the way it holds rings, about what it means to belong somewhere, really belong, when everyone around you keeps treating your presence as something negotiable. I flew home with charcoal under my nails and a stupid, brilliant, hopeful plan. I was going to finish the series in my loft, in the light my grandfather used to chase across those windows. I had canvases to stretch and paint to mix and months of work ahead of me, and I was so ready, so genuinely joyful in a way I hadn't been in years. The taxi turned onto my street, and my brain simply refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. Scaffolding, metal poles and green netting wrapped around my building like it had been packaged for shipping. Men in hard hats moving with the easy authority of people who have permission. A dumpster squatting on the sidewalk, overflowed with broken drywall, and splinterwood piled inside like bones. I got out of the taxi before it fully stopped. My bag fell. I didn't pick it up. The front door was propped open with a bucket. Inside, the hallway looked skinned. Mailboxes removed, posters stripped, paint scraped down to pale rectangles that looked like wounds. The air tasted like dust and endings. A man in a vest called out, "Can I help you?" He had a tablet in one hand, and the calm of someone who has permission, the calm of someone who does not expect to be questioned. "I'm Evelyn," I said, and I heard my own voice doing its best to sound steady. "Unit 3C. That's my studio." He tapped the screen. Once. Twice. 3C, he said. "Full renovation. Your items were moved to storage. New owners started demo yesterday." New owners. Those two words hit me like cold water thrown directly into my face. "I didn't sell," I said. He looked at me with an expression that was both polite and completely, devastatingly final. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I just worked the schedule." My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Don't dramatize. We made a reasonable business decision. Samuel needed capital. You can paint anywhere." I read it twice. My throat tightened until it felt like I'd swallowed a fistful of sand. Oh no. Oh, no, no, no. And that's when the full weight of what had happened began to land. Not all at once. In pieces. The way a building doesn't collapse all at once, but begins with one small crack that spreads so fast you don't see it moving until the whole thing is already falling. I called my father. He answered like I was late for dinner. "Addison," he said, "you're back." "Evelyn." I corrected him silently. "I'm Evelyn. I have always been Evelyn." And for the first time, I wondered if he had ever really seen me at all. "Did you sell my studio?" I asked. A pause. Not shock. Not guilt. Just irritation. The kind you feel when someone asks you to explain a bill you thought was already paid. "It was an investment," he said. "For the family. For Samuel." I said. "Don't do that," he warned. And my mother cut in, her voice smooth and bright, the kind of bright that cuts. "You're spiraling. You'll be fine. You always are. You can paint anywhere." In the background, I heard my brother Samuel laughing at something. That sound did something to me that I don't have clean words for. Stay with me, because this story is only just beginning, and what happens next, what I found out, what I did, and what it cost all of us, will change the way you think about family, about ownership, and about what it means to finally stop apologizing for taking up space. There's a specific kind of grief that doesn't come with tears. It comes with a stillness, a cold, glassy stillness, where your hand stops shaking not because you're calm, but because your body has decided that emotion is a luxury it cannot currently afford. You need all available resources for thinking, for surviving, for figuring out what in the world you're going to do next. That was me, standing in the doorway of my gutted hallway, the dust in the air catching the afternoon light, my bag still on the sidewalk where I dropped it, my phone still warm from the call with my parents. Samuel, my brother Samuel. I should tell you about Samuel. In my family, Samuel is the future. He has been the future since college, always one investor away from changing everything. Always one pitch away from the breakthrough that would justify every sacrifice the family had made. My parents talk about him the way people talk about a sunrise they personally scheduled. Like they made him happen. Like his success is proof of their good judgment. I am the other thing. The talented but unstable daughter. The one whose success, when it comes, is treated like a pleasant accident. My exhibitions are nice. My commissions are fun. My work is a phase that lasted long enough to make everyone slightly uncomfortable. And the unspoken arrangement, the one nobody wrote down but everybody understood, was simple. I earned. I helped. I didn't ask for too much. I was useful, and therefore I was tolerated. Samuel needed. Samuel was supported. Samuel was the investment. And apparently I was a collateral. I sat outside my strip building for a long time. I watched the workers move in and out. I watched them carry pieces of my walls in their arms like it was nothing, like it was rubble, like it had never held a decade of work and grief and growth and love. I didn't cry. The anger held me upright like a spine I hadn't known I had. I called my friend Maya. Maya isn't the kind of friend you call when you want someone to cry with you over wine. Maya is the kind of friend you call when you need someone who deals in facts. She's a lawyer I'd met through a collector who liked art and litigation with equal appetite. She doesn't flinch at tears. She doesn't feed them either. Send me everything, she said the moment I explained. Texts, emails, any documents that show how they presented the sale. And Evelyn, do not talk to them again without me. Her voice had that particular quality of someone who has seen this kind of thing before and knows exactly which drawer to open in her office the next morning. She read my documents with the slow, deliberate attention that my parents had never once given anything I produced. She looked up from the page. There's a problem with the way this was sold. What kind of problem? My stomach dropped before she finished the sentence. Your grandfather was careful, she said. More careful than anyone realized, maybe including himself. The building shell and the unit interior, they're legally separate entities. I blinked. What does that mean? It means, Maya said, tapping the page with one finger, that someone can buy the building. The developer can own the structure, the walls, the floors, the exterior. But the interior improvements, the studio build-out, the airspace rights tied specifically to Unit 3C, those belong to you, separately, independently. They are not the buildings to convey. I stared at her. So, my parents couldn't actually sell it. They could sell what they thought they were selling, she said. The shell interest, the line on a document. But the part that actually has value, the part that is your studio, your grandfather's studio, that was never theirs to touch, not without your signature. A beat, but there was a signature, I said slowly. Maya's expression didn't change, but something in it tightened. She slid a document across the desk. My signature. There was clean and confident at the bottom of a sale authorization. Except I had been in Berlin when that document was signed, and it was not my handwriting. It was close. Close enough to fool someone processing paperwork quickly. Close enough to pass through an office where nobody looked too carefully, because nobody had any reason to. But it was not mine. They forged it, I said. The words came out quieter than I expected. Not a question, just a statement, flat and final like a door closing. Maya nodded. Then she turned to the next page. A letter attached to the sale packet. Typed, formal, official-looking. It described me. It called me an eccentric artist with a history of instability, unable to manage assets responsibly, requiring family oversight for significant financial decisions. They hadn't just forged my name. They had built a paper version of me that justified why my signature didn't need to be real. They had taken everything my family had ever whispered about me at dinner tables and holiday gatherings, all those little diagnoses and dismissals, and they had formalized it, put it in writing, turned it into a document. They had tried to make me into a liability, not a daughter, a problem with a pre-approved solution. They didn't just steal from me, I said, and my voice came from somewhere far away, somewhere quiet and cold. They tried to erase me. Maya looked at me steadily. They tried to make you disposable, she said. And that's not just a civil matter. That's intent. Then she did something my family had never once done in 31 years. She acted like what had happened to me mattered. We filed an emergency motion that afternoon, a stop work request, fraud allegations, formal notice to the developer that the interior rights had not been validly conveyed, notice that any continued demolition risked significant damages for destruction of property belonging to someone who had never agreed to its sale. By evening, my mother had called 12 times. I watched the phone ring. and I let it. The old Evelyn would have answered, would have rushed to smooth things over, would have told herself she was keeping the peace when really she was just paying the toll that bought her another week of being tolerated. The new Evelyn watched the phone like it was a snake and kept her hands very still. Hold on, because they are about to show up at my door, and what they say and how they say it, and what I see on my brother's face when the mask finally slips. 2 days after we filed the motion, they arrived at my temporary rental like they were coming to correct an employee who had made a clerical error. No call ahead, no message asking if I was available, just a knock, and then the door opening before I had a chance to answer, because my mother has never in her life needed permission to enter a space she had already decided was hers to enter. She walked in first. Dad hovered behind her, eyes carrying a decade of tiredness in 2 days. He's not a bad man, my father. I want to be honest about that. He is a weak one. He loves the path of least resistance the way some people love music or food or long walks. He married a woman with strong opinions and raised a son with an appetite for resources. And somewhere along the way, he quietly excused himself from the harder work of being a parent to both his children equally. Samuel came in last, phone in his hand, eyes scanning the room like he was already looking for the exit. "You look awful," my mother said. "Thank you," I said, and then, because pleasantries were clearly not going to survive the next 30 seconds anyway, I said it plainly. "You forged my signature." Dad flinched. It was small and fast, but I saw it, and more importantly, Samuel looked away for half a second. Just half a second. But guilty people have their own specific vocabulary of avoidance, and I had grown up reading my family fluently. Mom didn't blink. "We did what we had to do," she said. "For Samuel," I said. "For the family," she corrected, and the way she said it, slow and even like she was explaining something obvious to someone slow, made my jaw tighten. Samuel stepped forward. The impatience was already leaking out from underperformance of calm. "The injunction is spooking my investors," he said. "This is affecting my runway. I have a closing round. I need assets on paper. I need stability. And my walls are in a dumpster," I said. "But sure, your runway." He scowled. "Stop making everything emotional. We'll get you a better studio. A new one. A replacement," I said. "Like you're buying me a new history." "You're sentimental," my mother said. "That's always been your weakness." There it was, 31 years of it, distilled into one sentence. Whenever I wanted something they couldn't categorize as practical, whenever I grieved something they had decided wasn't worth grieving, whenever I needed them to understand something that required them to feel it rather than calculate it, sentimental, unstable, dramatic, eccentric, every word in that letter they had written about me was something they had been saying about me at the dinner table for decades. "You can paint anywhere," my mother said, slow and deliberate, like a woman who has delivered a verdict. I looked at her. I looked at all three of them. I thought about my grandfather's stool, sitting in a storage unit on the edge of town. I thought about the gouge in the seat from when I was 12 and dropped a palette knife. My first tiny crime. My first lesson that accidents leave evidence. I thought about his hands, enormous and gentle, showing me how to hold a brush like it was a conversation and not a command. I said nothing, because Maya had told me, meet us at the building, not for a confrontation, for positioning, for witnesses, for the moment that would turn their version of this story inside out. 2 days later, we stood under the scaffolding on a gray morning. The netting shivered in the wind. The site manager was there. A representative from the developer's office stood slightly to the left, watching everything with the careful attention of someone who suspects they may have been handed a problem. Mom surveyed the building like it was a project she had managed successfully. "Look," she said, "it's progress. You should be grateful." Samuel's eyes were red at the edges. Not remorse. Stress. The specific panic stress of a man watching his funding round develop complications. "Just call this off," he said, voice stretched thin. "We can fix it, Evelyn, please, please." From him. Please sounded like a demand wearing a costume. Mom turned to me, irritated. "Stop enjoying this." I almost laughed. She said again, quieter, harder, like she was loading it like a weapon. "You can paint anywhere." And I smiled. Samuel's eyes went sharp. What's funny? That question, finally honest, because he could feel something shifting and it terrified him, and the terror was coming out as suspicion, and the suspicion was more real than anything else he'd shown me in years. I said quietly, calmly, looking my mother directly in the eye, "The studio you sold was actually—" And I stopped. I let the silence sit. Mom's eyes widened. "Finish," she hissed. Maya stepped forward with a folder. One page. Held it out with the steady hands of someone who has done this before, and will do it again, and does not find dramatic, because to her it is simply accurate. "Your parents did not sell what they believe they sold," Maya said. "This transaction does not convey the interior rights to Unit 3C. It does not convey the studio build-out. It does not convey the airspace rights attached to the unit. Those belong solely and exclusively to Evelyn. They always have." For one perfect, suspended second, nobody said anything. Then Samuel's face went the color of old paper. "Interior rights," he repeated. "That's not a thing. My mother said, brittle and fast." "It is," Maya said. "And if your contractor continues demolishing property that was never legally conveyed to the buyer, we add counts for destruction and conversion. This stops today." Dad's voice came out very small. "Evelyn," he said, "we didn't know." "You didn't read," I said. "You didn't care enough to read." I finished the sentence the way my grandfather taught me to finish a painting. Calm, certain, without apology. "It was never yours to sell." And that is when they started screaming. My mother's voice came out raw and high, a sound I had not heard from her before, a sound stripped of the polish and precision and all the careful management she applied to every interaction. It was a sound of someone who had never expected to be caught. "You did this to punish us," she shrieked. "You're jealous. You've always been jealous." Jealous of what exactly, I wanted to ask. Of the way they looked at Samuel? Of the way my accomplishments were always interesting, while his were always important? Of the way I had spent my entire adult life being useful enough to keep around, but never quite loved enough to protect? Ha ha ha. Yes, Mother, deeply jealous. Samuel grabbed his own hair, which I had never seen him do before, and his voice cracked in a way that had nothing left of his usual confidence. "Fix it," he said. "Evelyn, fix it. Call them off. Tell them it's fine. Tell them you approve. Just tell them." "Tell them what?" I asked. "That that you're entitled to my life?" I said quietly. He stepped forward, eyes wide, and something in them was wild in a way that made my stomach turn. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I realized I was seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the golden sun. Not the sunrise my parents had personally scheduled. Just a frightened man who had never once been asked to consider a cost he didn't want to pay. "You owe me," he said. "You always help. That's what you do." "Not this time," I said. Mom jabbed a finger toward my face. "You're selfish," she said, the word coming out like something she'd been holding back for years. "You're ruining your brother. Everything we built, everything we sacrificed." "You forged my signature," I said. "You called me unstable in a legal document. You sold something my grandfather left me while I was 600 miles away trusting you." Her jaw tightened, her chin lifted, and she said it one final time, slow and quiet and absolutely certain, like she genuinely believed it would still work. "You can paint anywhere." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about Arthur's hands on my shoulders when I was 8 years old, and crying because someone at school had said my drawing looked wrong. He didn't tell me it was fine. He didn't tell me the other kid was wrong. He said, "Show me what you meant to make." Because to him, what I meant always mattered. My mother had never once asked me what I meant. She had always told me what I was. I let the site manager hear. I let the workers hear. I let the developer's representative, who had arrived midway through the screaming and was now standing very still with the expression of someone recalculating a significant number of things, hear every single word. Maya didn't raise her voice. She never had to. "Any further contact with my client goes through my office," she said. "Approach her again and we add harassment to the complaint. The forged signature is a criminal matter. The sale is defective. Work on the interior is frozen." Frozen. That word landed in the dusty, air like a verdict. Samuel's shoulders dropped. I watched the future he had built in his head. The round closing, the investors, the dream of the thing that would finally justify all the years of almost. I watched it visibly reorganizing into something smaller and more frightening. Later that afternoon, I went to the storage facility where the foreman had told me my things had been taken. It was on the edge of town, fluorescent lit, a maze of roll-up metal doors and quiet echoes. A clerk handed me a key without looking at my face. Unit 48B. Inside, my life was stacked like luggage. Canvases wrapped carefully in plastic. Crates labeled in black marker. Paint-stained drop cloths folded in thirds. And there, wedged between a stranger's old dresser and a box of someone else's Christmas lights, was my grandfather's wooden stool, the one with the gouge in the seat. I crossed the room and put my hand on the wood, and the thing that had been sitting behind my eyes for 2 weeks, held back by anger and adrenaline and the sheer necessity of being functional, finally came loose. Not a dramatic collapse. Not the kind of grief that looks good in films. The small, quiet, devastating kind. The kind that makes your eyes sting and your chest ache and your jaw lock, because letting go feels like losing again. I pressed my palm flat on the wood and stayed there until I could breathe without it hurting quite so much. My phone rang. Mom. Of course. I answered. Not for her. Not because I owed her a single thing, but because I needed to hear the temperature of her voice now that consequences had arrived. Because I needed to know if anything had changed, if any of it had reached her, if there was anything left underneath the performance. She didn't say hello. Maya is threatening your father, she said. Maya is naming our choices. I said, this is insanity. Forging my name is insanity, I said. What I'm doing is legal. A pause. And then that voice, that soft, warm, particular voice she used when she wanted something, and had decided warmth was the correct tool. Honey, she said, please, you're taking this too far. We were trying to save your brother. By selling me, I said, silence. Dad came on, voice low and tired. Evelyn, we're your parents. You had access, I said. That's not the same thing. Samuel took the phone last. His voice had lost all its edges. I can't lose everything, he said. This round collapses without collateral. Evelyn, this is my life. Just sign something. Tell them you approve. We'll make it up to you. We will. I looked at my grandfather's stool, at the dried paint and the grain of the wood. Fingerprints from a man who had loved me without condition, without agenda, without wanting anything from me except that I keep making things. Make it up to me with what? I said, another lie? He swallowed hard. For the first time, underneath the panic, there was no arrogance, just a person who had taken something that was not his and was only now beginning to understand what that actually cost. I'm hanging up, I said. If anyone calls again, it goes through Maya. I know what you're thinking. Did she really go through with it? Did she really let them face the consequences? Did she hold the line? Yes. And the hearing is where everything finally came apart. Part 5 is the last chapter, and is the one that matters most. I want you to know that I did not sleep well the night before the hearing. Not because I was afraid. Not because I had changed my mind. But because I am a human being, and those were my parents, and that was my brother. And somewhere underneath all the anger and the hurt and the absolute clarity of what they had done, there was still a small, stubborn, heartbreaking part of me that wished it could have been different. That part of me had been waiting my whole life for them to choose me. The hearing room was quiet in the way that courtrooms always are, a pressurized kind of quiet, the kind that makes every chair scrape and every cleared throat sound enormous. My parents sat behind their attorney in clothes that announced respectability. My mother's chin was lifted. She had the bearing of a woman who has always believed that composure is the same as innocence. My father looked like he had aged somewhere between a week and a decade. His eyes didn't quite land on anything. Samuel could not sit still. His knee moved like something trying to escape his body. His hands opened and closed on the table edge. He looked around the room every few minutes, as though expecting someone to arrive with better news. Maya did not perform. She laid out facts the way a mason lays bricks. The split ownership structure, established by my grandfather with a care that none of us had fully understood until now. The forged signature, documented, and verified. The defamatory letter, the one that called me unstable and required oversight, placed into evidence with its precise, poisonous language on display. The timeline showing the sale had been rushed to meet Samuel's investor deadline, that the urgency had not been about the family. It had never been about the family. It had been about his round closing. The judge's face stayed neutral throughout, but his questions got colder as the minutes passed. The kind of cold that is not cruelty but clarity. When he granted the stop work order, Samuel's whole body sagged. Outside the courthouse, the sky was the same pale gray it had been the morning I stood under the scaffolding and first understood what had happened. My mother stepped into my path. She looked at me with glossy eyes that might have been tears or might have been the strain of maintaining a performance under unfavorable conditions. I genuinely could not tell anymore. "You're doing this because you hate us," she whispered. I looked at her for a long time, at the woman who had smoothed over every difficult thing with a bright voice and a deflection, who had spent 31 years telling me what I was, and never once asking who I wanted to be, who had written in a formal document that I was unstable and required management, and then called that love. "No," I said, and I meant it because it was true. "I'm doing this because I finally love myself more than I need your approval." She flinched, and then her expression did something I recognized. It was the same shift I had seen 100 times. The moment she decided that a conversation was no longer useful to her, the moment she reclassified a feeling as a problem and turned away from it. "You always had to be dramatic," she said, and walked away from me like I was a stranger who had inconvenienced her in a parking lot. I stood there and breathed, and then very quietly I thought, maybe she's right. Maybe I am dramatic, and maybe that was the first healthy thing I ever was in that family. In the weeks that followed, the legal process did what it was designed to do. The sale was officially unwound, at least the parts that could be. The developer negotiated to continue work on the building shell, the part that had been legitimately sold. But the interior rights, the airspace, the studio itself, stayed exactly where they had always been, with me. The forgery investigation took on its own life, as investigations of that kind tend to do. Samuel's investors stopped returning his calls. Not because of me, because fraud has a smell, and people with money have sensitive noses. My parents began to speak a language I had never heard from them before, the language of consequences. It is a narrow language, with a limited vocabulary, but it is honest in a way their comfort had never been. And the city, through a program my grandfather had quietly partnered with years before any of this, offered me formal stewardship of the loft, not ownership in the way that word had been weaponized against me. Responsibility, authority, a key that did not require anyone's permission to keep. The first time I walked back in, it did not feel like home. The walls were scarred. The floors were bare. Drywall dust still hung in the corners of the windows. The light arrived anyway, the way it always had, thick and golden, and completely indifferent to what the humans below it had been doing to each other. It fell on the exact spot where my easel used to stand. I stood in the middle of the wreckage and waited. For grief, maybe, for relief, for some large, clean emotion that would tell me the story was finished. Instead, I felt something steadier than any of those things. They hadn't destroyed my life. They had destroyed an illusion, the one I had been maintaining for 31 years without knowing it, the illusion that said I had to keep earning my place in my own family. That love was something you paid for in usefulness and compliance and strategic invisibility. That belonging to people required you to first belong to them. I reached into my bag, pulled out a stick of charcoal. My fingers didn't shake. I noticed that. I found a stretch of bare drywall that hadn't been painted yet, pale and clean and waiting, and I drew the first line, dark, certain, without apology. They wanted to turn this place into capital. I turn it back into meaning. And if this story means anything, if there's anything I want to leave with you, it's this. The moment the people who are supposed to love you begin to see you as a resource, they have already stopped. And that moment hurts in a way that is almost impossible to explain the specific, personal hurt of realizing that the love you thought you had was always conditional, always contractual, always contingent on you being convenient. But here's the other thing. That moment is also the first moment you finally, truly, completely belong to yourself. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life, because this story, my story, is one of thousands, and every single one of them deserves to be heard.